The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the ceiling fan and the slow ticking of an old wall clock. It was 10 p.m. in Ouagadougou when the message arrived. A message so blunt, so unapologetically arrogant, that even the youngest officer in the room felt his chest tighten with anger. President Ibrahim Traoré stood at the head of the long wooden table, his camouflage uniform blending with the dim light that hung over the chamber. His jaw was tense, his eyes scanning the words projected onto the wall. The ultimatum had come not through a diplomatic envoy, not through a formal meeting of equals, but through a cold digital communiqué, delivered by foreign powers who believed Burkina Faso could be bent with threats. The words were simple, brutal, and laced with menace. You have 48 hours to comply. Step down from power, surrender control of national assets, and allow international supervision, or face the consequences. No explanation, no negotiation, just a countdown meant to break the spine of a nation. Around him sat his closest advisors, generals with scars on their faces, ministers with weary eyes, young revolutionaries who had once marched in the streets chanting his name. The air was thick with disbelief. Colonel Oumar Diallo was the first to speak, his voice sharp, almost trembling with fury. They think we are children. They think Burkina Faso is a piece of land they can buy and sell. This is not an ultimatum. It is an insult to every man, woman, and child who has ever shed blood for this soil. Others nodded. The youngest among them, barely 30, whispered what many felt: if we give in, we are no better than slaves. Traoré said nothing at first. He simply walked to the window and looked out at the capital city. From the palace he could see the flicker of lanterns in the distance. Neighborhoods where electricity was scarce, where mothers prepared simple meals and fathers told their children stories of resilience. These were the people he had sworn to protect. And now, in less than 48 hours, their future was hanging in the balance. Finally, he turned back to the room. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of history. They do not threaten me, he said. They threaten Burkina Faso. They threaten Africa. If we kneel today, our children will kneel forever. But if we stand, if we refuse, we will ignite something they cannot extinguish. The room stirred. Some were afraid. Others were ready to die. But all knew this was not just about one man, or even one nation. The ultimatum was a test of dignity, sovereignty, and the very right to exist as free people. The shadow of history. The next hours were filled with debate, but the ultimatum cast a long shadow. Every ticking second of the wall clock seemed louder, harsher, more unforgiving. Ministers recalled the fate of other African leaders who had resisted similar pressures. Names whispered like warnings: Sankara, Lumumba, Gaddafi. All had dreamed of independence, and all had been struck down by foreign hands. Yet Traoré's resolve only hardened. He reminded them of Burkina Faso's own story. Once called Upper Volta, the land had been renamed Burkina Faso, the land of upright people. The name itself was a declaration of dignity, a refusal to bend. Could they now betray that very essence? One advisor, an old revolutionary who had once marched alongside Thomas Sankara, leaned forward. His voice was gravelly but steady. History has already chosen this moment for us. We can either live as cowards or die as men who stood tall. The words struck deep. For Traoré, the ultimatum was no longer just a political crisis. It was destiny knocking on the door. Whispers in the streets. By midnight, word of the ultimatum had begun to leak into the streets. Rumors spread in the crowded markets. Whispered in tea shops, murmured at roadside stalls. Some spoke with fear: they will bomb us, they will destroy us. Others spoke with defiance: let them come. We will show them we are not afraid. In a small house on the outskirts of the city, a mother soothed her child to sleep, while her husband sat with neighbors discussing what might come. They had no weapons, no wealth, no power, but they had pride. And pride, they believed, was stronger than bullets. A young student at the University of Ouagadougou wrote in his journal, "If they think we will surrender, they do not know the fire of Africa. They can take my life, but not my dignity." The ultimatum was meant to divide, to break morale. Instead, it was beginning to unite. A president's dilemma. At dawn, Traoré sat alone in his office, staring at the rising sun. He thought of his youth, of the years spent training as a soldier, of the ideals that had driven him to rise against corruption. He had not asked for this war, but now it was at his doorstep. A letter lay open on his desk, written by his late father many years ago. It was simple advice. My son, never forget that a man is not measured by what he owns, but by what he defends. The words burned in his mind. He realized that the ultimatum was not simply about power. It was about whether Burkina Faso could remain the land of upright people, or be reduced to another pawn in a foreign game. And so he made his decision. That morning, Traoré summoned his council once more. His voice was clear, unwavering. We will not comply. We will not kneel. If they want war, let them come. But let it be known, we choose dignity over chains. The council erupted, some with cheers, others with silent tears. The decision had been made. The countdown continued, but the spirit of resistance had been born. The world watches. News of Traoré's defiance spread quickly. International media painted him as reckless, a dangerous populist risking his nation's survival. But across Africa, something else was happening. From Mali to Niger, from Senegal to South Africa, ordinary people heard the news and felt a spark ignite in their hearts. This man speaks. For us, they said. He refuses what we all refuse. If Burkina Faso stands, maybe Africa can stand too. Social media lit up with messages of solidarity. Hashtags calling for sovereignty, independence, and dignity began trending across the continent. The ultimatum, meant to isolate Burkina Faso, was instead awakening a continental consciousness. Traoré had 48 hours, but already the countdown was transforming into a rallying cry. And as the first day ended, the city of Ouagadougou pulsed with an energy no foreign power could have predicted. People gathered in squares, waving flags, chanting songs of freedom. The ultimatum was no longer a sentence of death. It was the spark of a movement. The night after President Ibrahim Traoré's declaration, Ouagadougou did not sleep. The air was charged, vibrating with a sense of destiny. For decades, the people of Burkina Faso had lived under shadows of poverty, of exploitation, of foreign dictates that determined the price of their gold, their cotton, their very lives. But now, under the looming threat of a 48-hour ultimatum, they were beginning to see themselves differently, not as victims, not as pawns, but as the heart of a resistance. The first sparks. It began quietly. In a small cafe near the university, students gathered around a single radio, straining to hear every update about the ultimatum. The cafe owner, an elderly man who had once fought in the streets during the Sankara years, stood behind the counter with his arms crossed. They want us to kneel again, one student said bitterly. No, another replied. They want us to forget who we are. That is worse. The old man slammed his fist on the counter. Listen to me, he growled. I buried friends who died for this land. I carried the coffin of Thomas Sankara. I will not bury another generation, just so foreigners can keep their boots on our necks. If they want to fight, then let them see the fire of Burkina Faso. The students erupted in applause. One of them pulled out his phone and began live streaming. His words spread across social media within hours. We will not kneel. We are the land of upright people. By dawn, the slogan was everywhere, painted on walls, scrawled on cardboard signs, shouted in chants that echoed through the streets. We will not kneel. The market women. In the sprawling Grand Marche, the women who sold vegetables, spices, and fabrics were among the first to mobilize. They had always been the backbone of the city, their voices loud, their bargaining fierce. Now, those same voices became weapons of defiance. Fatumata, a mother of 5, raised her basket high and shouted, If they think they can starve us, let them try. We are the mothers of this land. We feed our children with dignity, not chains. Her words rippled through the crowd. Soon, hundreds of women locked arms, forming human chains in the marketplace, chanting in unison. Sovereignty, dignity, no more chains. Foreign media cameras captured the images. But what they failed to understand was the deeper meaning. The women were not just protesting. They were declaring ownership over their nation's future. Songs of defiance. By midday, musicians began to join the movement. Drummers set up on street corners, pounding rhythms that echoed through the neighborhoods. Griots, the traditional storytellers, composed songs overnight, recounting the ultimatum as if it were already a legendary tale. One song, sung by children, became an anthem. 48 hours they gave. 48 hours we rise. You may threaten our land, but you cannot take our skies. The melody spread faster than the ultimatum itself. Within hours, entire neighborhoods sang it together, their voices rising into the night sky. The fear and the courage. But not everyone was fearless. In the northern districts, whispers of fear persisted. Old men recalled the bombings of neighboring countries, the invasions disguised as peacekeeping, the assassinations carried out in the name of stability. What if they attack us? One asked, his voice trembling. They will crush us like ants. A young woman answered sharply. Ants bite. And when they bite together, even the lion flees. Her words silenced the doubt, at least for that moment. The Council of Elders. Meanwhile, Traoré convened a secret meeting with traditional chiefs and elders from across the country. They arrived in flowing robes, their staffs carved with symbols of ancestral power. One elder, his beard white as cotton, spoke first. My son, you carry a heavy burden. But know this, Burkina Faso has always resisted. From the time of our ancestors, we have stood against invaders. Do not fear their weapons. Fear only the shame of surrender. Another placed his hand on Traoré's shoulder. Do not think you stand alone. We stand with you. If they come for you, they come for all of us. The president bowed his head, deeply moved. He knew the ultimatum was designed to isolate him, to make him feel small against the vast machinery of global power. But now, standing in that circle of elders, he felt larger than he had ever been. The continental echo. What shocked the foreign powers most was not the defiance within Burkina Faso, but the echo it created across Africa. In Bamako, thousands of Malians poured into the streets carrying Burkinabe flags. In Niamey, Nigerians gathered outside the French embassy chanting, Africa will not kneel. In Dakar, Accra, and Johannesburg, rallies sprouted spontaneously. Social media burned with solidarity. Africans who had never paid attention to Burkina Faso suddenly declared themselves its brothers and sisters. Artists drew murals of Traoré standing tall against faceless giants. Poets wrote verses about the 48-hour fire that would cleanse the continent of fear. One Nigerian commentator put it bluntly on television. This is not about Burkina Faso. This is about all of us. If they break Ouagadougou, they break Africa. But if Ouagadougou stands, then Africa will never bow again. The threats intensify. Of course, the foreign powers were watching closely. Their ambassadors issued statements condemning the protests as dangerous populism. Their generals spoke on television about stability and responsibility. Behind closed doors, intelligence reports warned that Burkina Faso was slipping out of control. And so the threats intensified. Drones buzzed in the skies above Ouagadougou. Reminders that the ultimatum was not just words. Anonymous messages flooded government phones. Step down or watch your people suffer. But each new threat only deepened the people's resolve. They painted over the drone shadows with murals of birds flying free. They mocked the anonymous messages with laughter, posting them online with the caption, "Still not kneeling." The night of torches. On the second night, just 24 hours before the ultimatum expired, the people of Ouagadougou organized something extraordinary. From every neighborhood, from every village road, they gathered carrying torches. Thousands upon thousands of lights moved through the streets, converging on the central square. It was not chaos, but ceremony, an ancient ritual of unity reborn in a modern struggle. When the square was filled, the crowd began to chant in unison, "Dignity, sovereignty, Burkina Faso." The sound was deafening, but it carried no fear, only pride. Traoré stepped onto a balcony overlooking the square. For a moment, he was speechless. He had expected resistance, but not this tidal wave of unity. The ultimatum had meant to break the people. Yet here they were, burning brighter than fire itself. He raised his hand. The chants quieted. His voice rang out across the night. My brothers and sisters, they gave us 48 hours to surrender. But look at you. You have given me 48 million hours of courage. You have shown me that a nation cannot be broken when its people refuse to kneel. Together, we are stronger than their threats. Together, we are free. The square erupted in thunderous roars. The torches waved high, their flames reflecting in tear-filled eyes. And in that moment, the ultimatum was already defeated, not because the deadline had passed, but because the spirit of Burkina Faso had risen beyond the reach of fear. By the third morning, with only hours left before the ultimatum expired, Africa itself seemed to be holding its breath. The events in Burkina Faso had ignited something far larger than anyone expected. The fire that had begun in Ouagadougou's markets and universities was now spreading across an entire continent. The African pulse. In Bamako, Mali, thousands filled the Independence Square. Their banners were painted hastily but boldly. If Burkina Faso kneels, Mali kneels. We stand with Traoré. Women in vibrant fabrics banged pots and pans, their metallic rhythm echoing like war drums. In Niamey, Niger, protesters climbed onto rooftops waving both Burkinabe and Nigerian flags side by side. The chant was simple, but powerful. One struggle, one people. In Dakar, Senegal, rappers took to the stage, transforming the ultimatum into lyrics that electrified the youth. Their verses called out colonial exploitation, the arrogance of foreign powers, and the dignity of standing tall. Across the continent, artists, students, workers, and ordinary citizens began declaring that the 48-hour ultimatum was not just Burkina Faso's fight, it was Africa's rebirth. The global reaction. Foreign capitals watched with unease. Paris labeled the protests reckless nationalism. Washington spoke of protecting stability and human rights. Brussels threatened sanctions. Yet their words sounded hollow against the roar of millions across Africa who were no longer listening. For decades, foreign powers had dictated the narrative. They controlled the media, the markets, and the military partnerships. But now, in real time, African voices were writing a different story, one of unity and defiance. A Kenyan commentator captured the sentiment on live television. They believed they were issuing a threat to one man in Ouagadougou. Instead, they have awakened 1 billion people. This is no longer an ultimatum. This is a continental referendum on dignity. Traoré's gambit. Inside the presidential compound, Traoré understood the stakes better than anyone. The ultimatum was no longer just a personal challenge. It had become symbolic. Burkina Faso's decision would either inspire Africa or demoralize it. So he played a bold gambit. At midday, just 24 hours before the deadline, he called a press conference. Cameras from across the world zoomed in as he walked to the podium in full military dress. His beret tilted at a sharp angle, his eyes steady. He spoke slowly, deliberately, every word echoing through the chamber. They told us to kneel. We refuse. They told us to surrender. We refuse. They told us that in 48 hours, we must bow or face their wrath. My brothers and sisters of Africa, hear me. Burkina Faso bows only to God, and never to men who believe they own our future. The hall erupted in applause, but it was his final words that traveled like wildfire across the globe. If you strike one African, you strike us all. If you wish to fight, then know this: we are no longer afraid. We are awake. Within minutes, hashtag surged. Hashtag we are awake. Hashtag Africa will not kneel. Continental unity. In Accra, Ghana, university students marched carrying torches, chanting, Ouagadougou today, Africa tomorrow. In Johannesburg, labor unions called for boycotts of companies, linked to the powers behind the ultimatum. In Lagos, Nigeria, a 1 million-strong digital campaign flooded Twitter and Instagram with one message: stand with Burkina Faso. Even leaders across Africa, usually cautious in their diplomacy, began to shift. The presidents of Mali, Niger, and Guinea jointly declared that an attack on Burkina Faso is an attack on all of us. Ethiopia's prime minister warned foreign powers against destabilizing Africa further. It was unprecedented. For the first time in generations, African states, fractured by borders, drawn in foreign capitals, were beginning to speak. With one voice. The pressure mounts. Yet, as the hours ticked away, the pressure on Traoré grew more intense. Foreign drones buzzed lower over the skies of Ouagadougou. Anonymous phone calls threatened military strikes. Intelligence reports warned of mercenaries amassing at borders. Some ministers pleaded with him. "Mr. President, think of the lives at stake. One wrong move could bring bombs on our cities." But Traoré remained firm. He reminded them of their duty. If we surrender now, our children will inherit chains. If we resist, even if we fall, they will inherit freedom. Which legacy do you want to leave? The ministers fell silent. They knew he was right. The youth mobilize. Across the city, young people were preparing in their own way. Not with weapons, they had none. But with courage. Students organized communication networks, ensuring that if the internet was cut, messages could still be spread by radio, by word of mouth, by printed flyers. Neighborhoods formed defense committees, not to wage war but to show resilience. They stockpiled food, water, and medical supplies. They painted murals on walls, fists raised, chains breaking, a sun rising behind the outline of Africa. One mural bore the words, 48 hours for them, eternal hours for us. The youth knew they could not match the firepower of foreign armies. But they also knew that power was not just about guns, it was about the will of a people. The eve of the deadline. As the sun set on the second day, Ouagadougou braced itself. The ultimatum would expire at midnight. No one knew what would come next: bombs, assassinations, coups. But no one was running. Instead, people flooded the central square once more, carrying flags, drums, and banners. Some came with their children on their shoulders. Others came with nothing but their voices. The square glowed with candles and torches, a sea of light against the night. Traoré appeared once again on the balcony. His silhouette stood tall against the flames below. His voice boomed through loudspeakers. "My people, the clock they set for us runs out tonight. But listen closely, it is not our clock. It is theirs. They wanted to measure our courage in hours. But we measure it in generations. For 2 days, we have stood. Tomorrow, we will still stand. And long after their threats have turned to dust, Burkina Faso will remain the land of upright people." The crowd roared. As midnight approached, the chants grew louder, drowning out the sound of drones overhead. It was as if an entire nation had decided, collectively, that fear no longer existed. When the final seconds of the ultimatum ticked away, the people of Ouagadougou erupted in cheers, drums, and songs. They had crossed the threshold. The ultimatum was officially defied. But what no one knew was how the world would respond to such open defiance. Would the bombs fall? Would foreign armies march? Or had a new chapter in history truly begun? For now, there was only one truth that echoed through the city, through the continent, through the hearts of millions. Burkina Faso had not knelt. The ultimatum had expired. Midnight came and went, and Burkina Faso did not bend. Across the capital, people danced, sang, and prayed. For a brief moment, joy eclipsed fear. But as the sun rose over Ouagadougou the following morning, the atmosphere shifted. The storm was no longer a possibility. It was imminent. The first retaliation. The retaliation came swiftly, not with bombs but with silence. Overnight, international banks froze Burkina Faso's accounts. Aid shipments scheduled for arrival were suddenly delayed. Gasoline prices doubled in less than 12 hours. Food prices soon followed. Foreign media outlets painted a grim picture. Burkina Faso faces collapse. Read one headline. Another declared, "Traoré gambles with the lives of his people." But the people themselves refused to internalize the narrative. At the central market, vendors shouted defiantly, "They say we will starve? Let them watch us grow our own food." In rural villages, farmers dug deeper into the earth, planting more seed than ever before. "If they block us from outside," one farmer said, "we will live from the inside." The sabotage. But economic strangulation was not enough. Within days, strange explosions erupted near power lines. Communications towers mysteriously caught fire. Anonymous groups attempted to stir unrest with fake pamphlets. claiming Traoré had fled the country. Yet every act of sabotage backfired. Instead of sowing fear, it fueled suspicion toward foreign powers. Citizens formed neighborhood patrols to guard critical infrastructure. Young engineers volunteered to repair damaged lines with limited tools but unlimited determination. A mechanic named Idrissa told a journalist, "They thought we would panic. Instead, they gave us purpose. Now every man, woman, and child is ready to defend this land, not just with weapons, but with our hands, our knowledge, our unity." The gathering storm. In foreign capitals, military planners grew restless. The ultimatum had been ignored. Sanctions had not broken the spirit, and sabotage had failed. Pressure mounted to escalate further. Rumors swirled of special forces being deployed to neighboring countries, of mercenary groups hired to destabilize Ouagadougou. Satellite images revealed drones circling more frequently. Burkina Faso's intelligence confirmed that foreign operatives were trying to bribe officers within the army. One evening, Traoré summoned his generals. His voice was heavy but resolute. "They want to split us from within. They will offer gold, power, escape routes. But listen well, if anyone here betrays this cause, he betrays not me, but the people who trust us with their lives." The room fell silent. Every general present raised his hand to swear loyalty. For once, words felt more binding than contracts. The African front line. Meanwhile, the wave of solidarity across Africa was reaching unprecedented levels. In Mali, volunteer brigades offered to cross the border and fight alongside Burkina Faso if war broke out. In Niger, convoys of food and supplies rolled toward Ouagadougou despite international blockades. Ghanaian students staged sit-ins at universities, chanting, "Burkina Faso's fight is our fight." Even in countries traditionally allied with foreign powers, the ground was shifting. In Kenya, civil society groups published an open letter, "If Burkina Faso falls, Africa remains in chains. If Burkina Faso stands, Africa rises with it." African musicians released collaborative songs calling for unity, while filmmakers produced short documentaries on the courage of ordinary Burkinabe citizens. For the first time, Africa was not waiting for permission from the world, it was speaking to itself. Traoré's address to the continent. Sensing the moment, Traoré decided to address not just Burkina Faso but the entire African continent. Standing before a camera with only a Burkinabe flag behind him, he delivered his speech calmly, almost quietly, but every word hit like thunder. "My brothers and sisters of Africa, they have declared war on our dignity. They starve us, they silence us, they sabotage us. But understand this, Burkina Faso is not the victim. We are the spark. If they defeat us, then Africa will remain silent for another 100 years. But if we endure, if we resist, if we stand tall, then Africa will never kneel again." He paused, his eyes burning into the lens. "Do not fight for me. Do not fight for Burkina Faso. Fight for yourselves, for your children, for the future of this continent. Our enemies want to make us believe we are small. But when Africa stands together, we are the size of the world." The speech was broadcast across Africa, spread through television, radio, and phones. Millions wept. Millions clenched their fists. Across the continent, a single phrase dominated every conversation: "Africa will never kneel again." The enemy within. Yet as the continent rallied, shadows lurked closer to home. Late one night, intelligence officers intercepted communications between a high-ranking Burkinabe colonel and foreign agents. The colonel had been promised exile, wealth, and protection if he orchestrated a coup. Traoré received the report at 2 a.m. He sat silently for a long time, staring at the file. Then he called his security chief. The colonel was arrested before dawn. When news of the betrayal attempt leaked, the people did not despair. Instead, they rallied once more, filling the streets with chants of, "No traitors, no chains." The would-be coup only reinforced the sense that Burkina Faso was not just resisting foreign powers, but cleansing itself from within. The edge of war. By the end of the week, the situation had reached a boiling point. Foreign warships lingered in nearby waters. Troop movements were reported along borders. Threats of intervention grew louder in international forums. Ouagadougou braced itself. Volunteers built barricades on main roads, while the army reinforced defensive positions. Farmers sent food to the capital. Women organized medical brigades. Even schoolchildren joined in, drawing posters that read, "Burkina Faso will not fall." The people were not preparing for victory. They were preparing for dignity, whatever the cost. A moment of stillness. On the night before the rumored invasion, the city was eerily quiet. Families gathered in homes, holding hands, whispering prayers. Soldiers polished their rifles by candlelight. Mothers kissed their children and told them stories of ancestors who had fought for freedom. Traoré stood once more at the palace window, looking out at the silent city. He felt the weight of history pressing down on his shoulders. He thought of Sankara, of Lumumba, of every African who had dreamed of liberation and paid the ultimate price. He whispered to himself, "If tomorrow brings death, let it come. But let it never bring shame." The clock struck midnight. The storm had not yet broken. But everyone knew it was at the gates. The morning after the deadline expired, Ouagadougou awoke to the sound of drums, church bells, and the distant call of the muezzin. The city, once paralyzed by fear of a foreign strike, now pulsed with an energy no ultimatum could crush. The 48 hours had not broken Burkina Faso, it had remade it. Captain Ibrahim Traoré stepped onto the balcony of the People's House, overlooking the massive crowd that filled the square below. Flags of Burkina Faso waved like flames in the wind, but they were joined by flags of Mali, Niger, Guinea, and even distant nations whose people had come to stand in solidarity. The ultimatum that was meant to isolate him had instead united a continent. His voice carried through the speakers, calm but resolute. They gave us 48 hours to surrender. We gave them 48 hours to witness the rebirth of African dignity. Today, we declare that no nation, no empire, no foreign power will ever again dictate the destiny of Burkina Faso. We stand free, and we stand together. The roar of the crowd shook the air. It was not only joy, it was release. Generations of frustration, of humiliation, of broken promises, were now dissolving into a single chant. Burkina Faso, Burkina Faso, Africa, Africa. News outlets across the world broadcasted the scenes live. What was meant to be a story of a small nation, kneeling before global pressure had turned into a cinematic reversal, a people, once underestimated, refusing to bow. Commentators spoke of a second independence, a spark that might ignite across the continent. But Traoré knew this was only the beginning. The 48 hours had passed, but the struggle for sovereignty was eternal. He gathered his closest advisers in the chamber, their faces illuminated by the dim morning light. They will come back, perhaps harder, perhaps with new tricks, one minister warned. Traoré nodded. Let them. What they don't understand is that something has shifted. We are no longer alone. Every threat they make against us will only draw more brothers and sisters to our side. We turned their ultimatum into a movement. And movements do not die, they grow. That evening, fires were lit across villages and cities as symbols of resilience. Elders told stories of how their ancestors resisted colonization, and children listened wide-eyed, realizing they were living through a chapter of history that would be retold for centuries. Musicians composed songs overnight, their melodies echoing through the streets. Poets etched words of defiance on walls and in hearts. Across Africa, young people saw the footage and felt something awaken inside them. From Dakar to Kinshasa, from Addis Ababa to Johannesburg, students whispered, "If Burkina Faso can rise, why not us?" And so, the ultimatum had failed in its original mission, but succeeded in creating something far greater, a continental call to dignity. As the night settled, Traoré stood alone by the window of his office, looking out over the city lights. The sky above Ouagadougou was filled with stars, scattered like sparks of hope. He breathed deeply, not as a man relieved of danger, but as a man who had embraced destiny. History tried to break us in 48 hours, he whispered to himself. Instead, it gave us eternity. And with that, the story closed, not with surrender, but with the birth of a legacy that would echo across Africa and the world.